Welcome to the Modern Merchant Podcast. I'm your host, Austin, and coming at you with another episode today. Super excited about this one. I actually have a couple teammates on the FlexPoint team joining us today. What we're going to talk about is e-commerce integrations. And a lot of this is going to kind of go hand in hand with doing custom development work, as well as leveraging pre-built integrations and just how all that makes sense kind of in the e-commerce realm. So again, I have my CTO of FlexPoint, Matt, here, as well as my CEO of FlexPoint, Travis. Thanks, guys, for joining. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having us on.
Yeah, appreciate you putting this together.
Absolutely. Ready to get this started because I know, really from a consultant perspective and, kind of chatting on any really customer success manager conversations with current customers, integration talk always comes up, right? And really one of the main things is, and that I've seen is kind of the evaluation of using pre-built integrations as well as custom integrations and just how we need to make all of these systems kind of make sense together. So really the first topic I want to get on is kind of defining what an integration is, specifically for e-commerce. Matt, I'm sure you could probably give us a better understanding. What would you say is just a good, easy definition of e-commerce integration?
Yeah, so it's going to vary, but basically any way that you're obtaining or sending over, product data, order data, invoicing data, anything related to e-commerce. So, if you look at it from two different sides, you're going to obtain this data from somewhere, such as obtaining product data from a source or a fulfillment center, distributor, third-party logistics company, a PIM, product information management system, and then you're going to essentially want to push that data somewhere else. And so it's just a way to help automate that process in kind of a day and age where all this data lives in different areas. And so finding a method to integrate, whether that's via a file, whether it's an API integration, or really any mechanism that you can do to obtain that data and pull it into a system and then use it somehow and then sync it up or push it to another system is kind of what we're talking about when we're referencing e-commerce integrations.
Yeah, absolutely. And it really kind of just, keeping it simple is connecting system to system or connecting some type of way of communicating with, two different platforms, two different softwares, two different, maybe an ERP to a OMS, really just moving data back and forth, which is obviously our bread and butter. And that really goes hand in hand with custom development work and custom integrations. And that's kind of the bulk of what, really we wanted to talk about today. One thing that we get all the time, and, customers always asking us questions is should I go down the custom route, right? Should there be some type of custom development needed to be built here for this specific operation to work exactly with what I want with my system and my platform? Travis, I want to direct this one towards you because I know you've been in the realm of evaluating custom integrations and really just kind of understanding if this is going to make sense for that customer and kind of what goes, into play there. What would you say is the first thing like a company should ask themselves if a custom integration should work? Like what should be their question that they should be asking their team? Like, should we do this or not? What should be the first topic that comes onto their mind?
Yeah. The first thing you're going to want to do is just evaluate the market. What's out there that's pre-built? Is there any alternative? Because the second you go down custom anything, whether you're talking about custom t-shirts or merchandise to integrations, it's going to be more expensive than anything that's pre-built and be repeated and, sold in a pre-built fashion. So you definitely want to look at that and understand, okay, well, there's nothing there that accomplishes our goal. And maybe it's connecting to a supplier or it's connecting two different systems together. Once you realize that there's nothing pre-built out there that's ready to go, that makes it a little bit more cost effective and maintainable for you, you got to look at what's the actual value, right? What's the value I'm getting out of this? And what do we think can we get in return? Connecting to a dropship supplier, for one, it might be a need to have. This is a large supplier that is a big piece of your business. You need to make this connection happen. So it's a no-brainer. You need to do it, right? So it's not really hard to kind of look at ROI on that. It's not kind of one of those nice to haves, like I need to integrate my CRM, but I can get by without it for a little bit, right? So definitely looking at what you're going to get back in return. And then, digging into, what does it take after the fact, right? And you'll have to start looking at different vendors, and I think we'll talk more about evaluating, but that is the next step, is really evaluating, okay, we need to have it. This is a big part of our business. It's a big part of our strategy, our competitive advantage. We can do it. What's the total cost of ownership of this integration? That's a big thing to think about. It's not just the integration. I can hire a developer off Upwork. He can build this script that pulls down a file and uploads it to my Shopify store, and boom, we're done. It costs me less than $1,000, right, to do that. But what's the total cost of ownership of maintaining it? Are there more that are going to come later that you need to have this be a repeatable process? So really looking at that holistically and understanding your business strategy as a whole and how this is going to play in the your business is kind of where you should do to step back first before you just go hire someone on Upwork to build an integration.
Yeah, it's really, it comes down to the opportunity cost, right? So it's budget versus how is this going to be effective for my business? Is it really going to automate things? Is it going to bring down labor costs? How many times do we hear people that are constantly manually placing orders throughout the day, hundreds of orders throughout the day, where, either a pre-built integration or a custom integration or some type of platform can kind of help you out there. So I think it's definitely, again, hand in hand with what you mentioned, is the opportunity cost on that. And whenever you get into evaluating, right, should we go with pre-built or custom integration work? Matt, what do you think? What do you think is like the first thing that that they should do right out of the gate to start the evaluation process?
Well, just to kind of piggyback off of what Travis is saying, the idea of using a pre-built versus something custom, sometimes you may have 80% of what you need as well. Like you may have, I can import most of their data, but I can't handle descriptions or attributes really well, right? And like a lot of those nitty gritty details are another part of that evaluation, where it's like, you need to kind of think, let's say I could get to 80% in, and maybe there's a manual workaround for that 20%. Is it worth kind of going a custom route just because, I can't support this minor, use case, right? Or is it worth kind of finding workarounds to make that work? So just wanted to kind of caveat that too, where I've seen a lot of that, where most of the time pre-built connectors will work for the majority. But back to kind of Travis's point, like if that minority of that functionality is strategic, to your business, then you may have to evaluate a custom route at that point. As far as evaluating, really, you kind of need to define what you're really trying to achieve. That's one of the biggest things that we see. Like, are you trying to import all product data? Are you trying to make sure you get orders? Are you trying to ensure that you have accurate invoice amounts? Do you have any sort of custom unique things to your business that someone else doesn't? And so a good method that we kind of use, and that a lot of people really use, is kind of compare it to the pre-built, right? Like look at a pre-built out there that maybe solves most of it and see where the gaps are, right? And you leverage those gaps to determine, okay, well, this works, but it doesn't do X, Y, and Z. And so, that's more my important thing. And out of this pre-built, maybe they offer, these functionalities, but I really don't even care about part of these functionalities they offer, right? And so kind of the biggest step is kind of defining, like really with any development work, defining your requirements and kind of understanding like what you're really looking for, and what would make that integration or that connection a success metric in your mind. And I usually try to isolate that down to the need to have versus a nice to have, right? And so it would be nice to have this data, but at the end of the day, we have a workaround for that. And so then, you can kind of, when you get back an evaluation and it's kind of a line item out, in our case, like when we quote our customers for these, and we try to give them a breakdown of where the hours would be spent, you can kind of evaluate, okay, is this requirement or this component of this integration worth the extra effort and the money and the time to achieve it, or would I rather find kind of a workaround? And so break down the requirements, really find the gaps of what you're looking for, define what your success metrics are, and then evaluate it against pre-builts and kind of see what it would take for you to do it. And to actually do it, obviously there's companies out there that do custom integration work. You could go to someone like Upwork, or a website like Upwork and leverage that. But you also kind of want to think about subject matter expertise. And so, if you're going to some, random developer and they've never interacted with your platform that you're dealing with, or any of the, intricacies of that, you have to take that into consideration, where they may have, maybe a larger number of hours that they have to work to achieve something. Maybe they miss some nuances that are kind of relevant to that platform. And so that's kind of the second step of evaluation. Try to find, someone that's really knows and understands, your use cases and the systems that you're trying to connect together, is an important aspect too.
Yeah, and it's a pretty extensive process, I feel like, in the evaluation process, and you kind of got to check all these different boxes. I really like what you said. Now, I really like what you said real quick too, is the need to have versus the nice to have. And I know, Travis, you and I have talked about that all the time, is defining that need to have and nice to have as being one of the first steps of evaluating. But yeah, I definitely want to get your thoughts on that too.
Well, Matt brings up a good point. I think if there's anything to take away from this, we're talking about specific e-commerce integrations, the business logic that goes into that, and having domain expertise, or at least some background there, is so important from whoever you hire, especially the more complex that your integration is. So, we talk about e-commerce integrations, just to kind of step back to that. It's typically syncing inventory and cost data, right? On the lowest level. The SKU has an inventory quantity and it has a cost. And it's, where is it stocked from a warehouse perspective. Product data is a big piece in drop ship, right? Getting product data from a distributor, if you're drop shipping, is a big piece. Not as much if you're doing traditional, wholesale retailing. But product data feeds are a big piece of that. So understanding the nuance that goes into getting images, right? And the pulling an image link or pulling from a Dropbox file and correlating that back to, a SKU number in a inventory feed or product data feed. There's a little nuance there that if your developer is just a guy that knows how to build something, he's going to have to, learn this for the first time, where, e-commerce specific developers who know these workflows won't go through, that learning curve. The order routing and the shipment tracking side of things, that's huge. If you've never done that before, especially depending on how sophisticated the integration is, are you bringing in multiple sources? Are you just sending it to one actual supplier or one platform, or is it multiple? All of those things factor in. And the most basic level, just sending orders via email, sure, a developer can definitely figure that out. But if they're not familiar with, okay, what do I need to send in this order that I'm sending via this integration? You're gonna have to over communicate more and more with that developer on what that should look like. So the work really kind of falls on you. And to Matt's point about the need to have, nice to have, if you can save, it really comes back to a question of ROI. If it's an order routing integration and you are currently have a full-time employee doing that order routing, right? Manually grabbing an order from your order management system, sending an email, attaching a CSV, whatever it might be, maybe manually typing it into an e-commerce platform of their supplier. Just as an example, manually grabbing tracking information, what could they be doing with their job if they're not just simply hitting keys all day to copy and paste over order information? Can they be doing things that aren't getting done? Can they be driving the business? We have a quote from one of our customers who was doubling order volume during a certain quarter, and at the same time was able to go from 2 people to 1 person managing their orders, just because they implemented our system and were able to kind of automate that. So you got to kind of look at that, and that might kind of drive what they need to have, as it goes, because if it can help you grow your business, then it becomes very strategic. But yeah, I just want to kind of hit on those, and that the last piece, just to kind of wrap up on the evaluating side, knowing your workflows, knowing them so you can communicate to the developer, and leveraging hopefully a developer that does already have some background in your workflows is number one. And ideally, when you're automating, try to replicate what you currently are doing manually and then improve it. A lot of people in any, and to Matt's point, talking about, looking at custom dev in general and how to evaluate, the scope of it at a whole, try to keep the scope down to replicate what you're doing manually and then improve it through the automation that you have. That's typically the best, I would think, Matt, that from what you've seen in that approach.
Yeah, it's definitely the best route to kind of get the manual. If you can take a lot of your manual interactions and automate those, like, that's a great first step, right? And we've seen that with a lot of our customers where, we focus on that first, and then we think of, okay, what's the next evolution of that afterwards, right? But with that in mind, back to kind of evaluating, there are 2 other things that, really come into play. And one of those is scaling. And so, it is good to think about the long-term picture of your business and to think about, I'll provide an example, right? So like imagine, you're selling a product from one distributor and you think in the future you might expand to another distributor that sells those same type of products, right? Like if you build kind of a one-to-one integration between that distributor and your platform, and then all of a sudden you would like to incorporate this other distributor in the future, right? Like now you're going to have to come with this like reconciliation process of how do I ensure that I can make a decision on where do I even route that order, right? So when Travis is talking about the order routing, like it can get crazy as you start to scale your business, and you've got to kind of think about those long-term requirements whenever you're either looking at custom development or pre-built solutions around like, is this going to allow me to expand my operations, in the way that I see fit in the future? And you may not have to solve those problems out the gate, but you should at least think about them, and you should at least ensure that the solution that you're kind of going towards long term will account for that long-term scalability that you would need, as you grow your business and expand maybe your automation or anything like that, right? So that's definitely important. And I had another one, but to be honest, I've lost it, and so we'll come back to it if I think about it.
Yeah, no, well, you kind of touched on something that I think can be a whole nother podcast, and Austin, we should talk about doing one of these in like a month or two. But the build versus buy conversation, right? And you're basically bringing up like you can build something really quickly, but you're somewhat touching on, think about your business in a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. Are you going to be continued to build on top of that, and what does that look like? Versus can you buy something that gives you a foundation at least? And a lot of the custom integration work we're going to see, it's custom for a reason. You need something custom to your business. Is there a platform like a FlexPoint or other ones out there that's more of that foundational hub that you can build on top of? So that's a good thing. And also, I don't know if we plan on talking about it in this, but custom integrations are fine. Having that foundation of the logic and the something you can build into an API rather than just kind of hacking something together for the first time out of thin air by someone you hired on Upwork. Two very different things, right? Having that core foundation, I think, is good, and you can still customize as you go. There's NetSuites and the Salesforces of the world known for being super customizable. I think that's worth maybe discussing a little bit as well. And there's a little bit of a difference there on those kinds of custom integrations versus like just building something out of thin air.
Sure.
Yeah. I think, from our perspective and just being, this is our life, right? Every single day we're talking the talk and we're helping these businesses out. And I think that, building that foundation from the start, from the get-go is 100% like, the first step of going. We had a customer not too long ago that I was speaking with that told me, over the past, it was like 4 to 5 years, they've spent millions of dollars on custom dev work for their own just custom system. They just started with the custom route right out of the gate and have just been building on top of it, like you guys have been talking about. And then it gets to a point where they start to realize, wow, we're spending way too much money right now maintaining, having this dev team, like, keeping everything up to date and adding on more and more. Like, why don't we go with someone like FlexPoint? Why don't we go with another platform or some other software out there that's going to save us so much money, and then we can leverage their team? And I think we have some topics here, and I think the order, I want to skip ahead to really what we're talking about right now, because I think it's very interesting to kind of stay on this track, is the whole in-house dev work versus outsourced dev work for custom integrations or e-commerce integrations. What's the opportunity cost for in-house versus outsourced? And even outsourced, not just necessarily, I'm just going to outsource this dev team and I'm going to give them all my login credentials and I'm going to tell them what to build. Even leveraging someone like us, where we're technically, we're the software that help you out, but we have the dev team to do custom work because we have the experience. So, what's your thoughts on that? I know you've got a lot of, probably going through your head right now.
Yeah. So, just kind of going back to your previous comment around, the customer that invested a lot of money in building their own kind of system for their needs. That's a great in-house representation. If you want to be the next Shopify, how they started as like an e-commerce company with surfboards and kind of a Canadian kind of e-commerce actual retailer, right? And then they evolved that into the platform, or like an Amazon, where you build the platform up and you spend a ton of technology and then you do Amazon Web Services, right? And so if you're going for that play, that's a great in-house leveraging, of your resources. It's also, anything highly specific to your business, right? that's great in-house, a great reason for an in-house development team. Like if you know that this is like your core business and this is the value that you're providing, that's typically when we see people go in-house. And so, some examples of that could be like if you're an affiliate kind of network, or something like that, and you're building that core affiliate kind of software inside of there, and that's a unique challenge that maybe someone else hasn't solved, and there's not a platform out there to do that. Those are really good examples of when you would want to use in-house dev teams and kind of expand that, because they're building things that are unique to your business, that are like detrimental to your success, and almost like I think of it almost like proprietary, right? Like those are things that you don't envision other people having, or you don't really, someone else isn't solving that problem. Outsourcing is really anything that is supplementary to your business, right? Where it's not my core business that I have an integration to this place. I know I need to submit orders to them. I need to automate that at some point, but there are many vendors and platforms out there that can help me achieve that. And really, that small component of my business is not my core business. It's just a necessary thing to a means to the end, right? And so I generally, most of the time, it seems that retailers and brands and things like that are really more centered around focusing on the things that matter to their business, like branding their business, finding, manufacturing partners to manufacture their products, finding good distributors, best pricing, understanding how they can like warehouse products internally to reduce some of the cost and order in bulk. Like those are more their business centric things of how they can offer, and obviously like marketing strategies, right? Like social networking, and those are their core business. That's the value that they provide, right? When you think about why you may go to a certain website and buy products off their website, it's not because they have the best software most of the time. It's because they, have the best prices, or they have the best product selection, or, whatever it may be. And they've kind of branded and they've curated their selection really well. And so those are generally the things that most businesses focus on in the e-commerce space. And you would really only really want to leverage in-house dev if you find a unique, like proprietary thing that you can offer that you don't see being possible by outsourcing it, right? It needs to be domain centric in your business.
Has to be competitive advantage, basically, is what you're saying. It's a great point, right? If it's not competitive advantage, it's just a commodity. It's just anyone else. I mean, there's this book about, I think it's called The Big Switch. It's a super old book about how technology is essentially just a commodity, and that it's not really a competitive advantage for most companies. There's some debate around that, because it could be said that Amazon, the reason they built AWS was to be able to run their e-commerce website as fast as possible, and faster than anyone else on the web, which at that time, how quickly it ran was literally a competitive advantage. So they invested heavily in the AWS infrastructure to make sure that they had a quick checkout, conversions were high, and it really was a competitive advantage. Now they basically said, okay, it is a commodity. Everyone can have AWS, right? And so there will be more technological competitive advantages that you can leverage as a retailer and a brand. But to Matt's point, he's spot on. Like that's typically not how you win that game. You win that game by being a good retailer and a good brand, and the technology is usually table stakes, what you see out there. The ad technology past it and maintaining it and doing it in-house is typically, the commodity that is not really giving you that huge of an advantage. With that said, you do need to be looking at how to leverage technology to be running a good business. And you can get a competitive advantage through technology by leveraging a third party, right? You can leverage a third party. You don't have to do it in-house. And when it comes to in-house versus outsource, I really think for these mid-market to the larger enterprise retailers, I think a healthy mix of both. Really having an in-house dev that can work on some projects and work on different, can speak the dev speak and work with an outsourced specialist, right? That is on, like, Austin, you brought up, like we have developers that will build custom integrations on our platform and connect to other platforms, right? Someone that specializes in understanding that exact platform is a consultant. I mean, that's really how the big boys do it now. They hire consultants, and the consultants, will be specialists around a certain platforms or domain expertise. The in-house devs, are potentially moving into more of a managerial role. I feel like, talking with people that work at these big retailers, I feel like they're just professional agency recruiters or hirers, right? Like they hire agencies for everything. They're really good at like hiring agencies to do stuff. And there's a reason why they do that. They're hiring specialists to do the work that it would take them a ton of time in the learning curve to figure out how to do. And so it makes sense. But I think having, some of a light dev that might turn more into more of a subject matter expert on their own business, right? Their business logic, their business case. It's really about having specialists in certain roles, and whether they're deving or just dev managing. I think a healthy mix of that team is what makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And if I can kind of expand on that a little, like it's definitely true, right? As a business, you may have some specific business things like, I want to make sure that anytime my customers place an order on my store, they have a real-time shipping rate. They know exactly what they can do. And like to achieve that, you may have to connect multiple systems together, right? You may have to find like a rate shopping provider like Ship Engine or something so that you can shop the cheapest rates given the 2 locations that are, being set up at any given time. And so, like those things, for example, are business kind of requirements that are best implemented when you have some sort of internal resource that can at least speak to that, right? And they know where these systems and these parts live at everything. And even though they may not dev everything, they may use pre-built connectors and other platforms to kind of aid in that process. They have the domain understanding of what they need to achieve that end business goal. And then they're working with integrators, they're working with platforms to kind of make sure that all the pieces are aligning so that they can fundamentally achieve that. And so that's another really good use of an in-house dev, even if they're not actually deving, like Travis is saying, they at least understand the components at play and they can help connect those pieces together with third-party vendors or third-party platforms. So definitely a good point.
And I love what you mentioned, Travis, about kind of making sure that you have some type of dev contact or consultant on your team, because if you don't, right, like how many times we've talked to maybe certain tech managers or maybe not tech managers, right, CEOs and things like that just don't understand the language, don't understand like, hey, I know you need this. We can grab this from the API, or here's some calls, and they're just like, what's an API? Like, what's a call? Like, things like that. So having that contact on your team to help when we say are building custom integrations for you, because we're the specialists when it comes to an e-commerce, order management integration or inventory management integration. That's all we've been doing for 15 years. So I think it's definitely worth asking the questions of, what you guys are talking about, like what's the business use case and is it a commodity or not? And then secondary to that is, I think this is super important, is if you are looking to outsource, if you are looking to use some third party, if you're looking to use some, outsourced team, ask what their background is, right? Have they been doing this for forever? Have they been doing this specific type of custom integration? Have they been connecting these systems, do these operations? Have you guys been doing that? Because that's one thing that's worth noting is, and I think this is going to be a nice little segue into the whole pre-built integration versus custom integration is, a lot of system out there, they have these integrations, but is that really their core, value, right? Like, for instance, we were talking about this earlier, is connecting my Shopify account to Amazon. I have an Amazon store. I sell on Amazon, the same exact products that I sell on my Shopify site. Shopify isn't really a management platform that connects system to systems. What they're good at is building great, easy turnkey website solutions with payment processing and really having a great brand, right, marketing experience for your customer. They're not known to have a great integration with Amazon because it's just not their core business model. So one thing, Travis, I'll start with you, is give us your thoughts kind of on this whole pre-built integration versus custom integration. Maybe some examples that you've seen with like other systems out there.
Sure. I think you'll have to, as a retailer, typically I'm talking about a retailing scenario, for brands for sure a little bit more, but or sometimes at least, but retailers have to look at themselves like, do they feel that integration and integrating with other systems is going to be core to their retail business? Because traditionally retail didn't really have to do much integration. They, you see most of these multi-channel platforms and OMSs out there, and there's a ton of just, you search for inventory and order management, right? And you see all the same names, 20 or 30 out there, all going for the same customer. They're going for the customer just needs one siloed inventory and order management system that is maintaining their warehouse inventory, and can send a PO via once a month, and it's really and they have a pre-built connection to Shopify and it works fine, right? Or BigCommerce or whatever. If you're that kind of company and integration is not core to what you see as your business strategy and your fulfillment strategy and as a company as a whole, then you might be fine with pre-built integrations and a system that isn't really focused around integration. If you have distributed fulfillment and need distributed order management type systems where you're sending orders to dropship suppliers, you're integrating via APIs, you're integrating via EDI, you really do need to look at what, is this system really built for that? And, what's pre-built, is it ready to go versus what's custom that needs to be done? So typically the systems that are built for integrations and have the idea of their customer is going to be heavy in integrations, it'll be easier to build custom on top of that. So, that's kind of a long way of saying that first it starts with the platform. Before you even start looking at pre-built versus custom, look at your platform. Is it extensible? Is it customizable? The NetSuites of the world, FlexPoint, I brought Salesforce earlier, more kind of like a holistic outside of the commerce side, but they have a commerce component. They are known for being super customizable. That comes with, a little bit more complexity, and it comes with more work and time that might go into understanding the system. But if you are looking to integrate and have integrations be a core to your business, making sure that it's going to fit your workflow, right? Starting with your workflows, understanding your flows, and it's customizable and flexible enough to fit those is going to allow you to really not have to switch platforms every 5 years. That's a big thing, right? Not having to switch. So, looking at the platform, understanding the API docs, having that in-house dev that can kind of talk and speak to your logic and look at the docs and make sure it fits your business cases is really kind of the first couple steps in identifying, with whether pre-built or custom integrations are going to make sense for you and your business strategy.
Yeah, and just to kind of go a little further into, like, I see a common challenge is people basically choose the upfront time versus essentially the longevity, right? And so, like, for example, it's super easy to set up Oberlo on Shopify and get going, and you can do that within an hour, and now all of a sudden you can sell products online. Whereas even the more simple solutions, like even inventory source, kind of in getting that set up, still requires you to establish a relationship, kind of get your account set up and everything. But now you have cheaper pricing potentially, or you have more quality products or more reliable distributor, right? And so definitely when you're looking at kind of pre-built versus custom, don't get too dissuaded by the setup time, for example, if it's going to be long-term beneficial to your business, and so you have to kind of factor that into, like the onboarding versus the longevity, and are you going to have to do a migration, kind of like what Travis is saying, in 3 years and kind of migrate to another system, or can you leverage that and continue to expand on it?
And just going back to the in-house versus outsource, I just wanted to kind of touch on that. Like, I think there's three aspects of a custom integration. There's building it, there's maintaining it, and there's scaling it. And knowing that and thinking about that will help you determine, one, the platform, whether the pre-built versus custom route is good for you, and how to do your mix of in-house versus outsourced employees, right, or consultants. So if you think about building is easy. Building is the easiest part of all of that. You can connect two dots, right? You can connect point A to point B, API to API, CSV, whatever. You can connect those. You can hire down to Upwork tomorrow. It can be done. Maintaining is tough, not only from as orders scale up or inventory size scales up or product data scales up, but also the complexity. Maintaining just in general as things change, I should say, before I get to scaling. Things change, it's maintaining it. How do you know? Is there a tooling in there to alert you when things change? All of that is a factor. If it goes down, if you outsource that and then you look to maintain it, and that guy, he set it up and then he decides he needs to change business, decision, makes a job change, right? His whole career changes. So he's like, oh, by the way, that server I set up for you, I'm going to shut it down. You need to go figure out how to get my code on someone else's server. So maintaining that part and then scaling it as the data volume goes up, and then as the complexity increases with the amount of different integrations that you have to add to it. You should look at that on, I probably want someone in-house, or at least not in-house necessarily, but like I want a core partner that can help me maintain and scale something versus having to reinvent the wheel and do all of that in-house. Building on top of a layer for custom business logic can be done though, right? And that can be maybe in-house because they understand your business logic. So I'll pass it to you, Matt, because we've talked about this just, over a couple of beers before. I'm just amazed at what I've seen you build specifically with inventories on FlexPoint, just like the AWS infrastructure, the monitoring, the job management, all of that. I mean, when we start retail has gone to that. The second you become a retailer with a distributed order management system or distributed fulfillment strategy, essentially, you go away from this siloed, I can use any off-the-shelf warehouse or inventory management system to I now need like an infrastructure to maintain these integrations and to scale up. And I've always thought that was amazing. On like before you even look at the product, that underlying foundation is key. So how can I guess CTOs from a retailer perspective, how can they look at that and understand like that's a piece of this as well?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, anyone when they're looking at their business, they have to consider the moving parts. They have to think about the risk involved with that. They have to think about the maintenance, mitigation plans, responsiveness around how you're going to react to events that happen. And so obviously, from an infrastructure standpoint, as you scale up your operations, as you add more distributors, as you want to sync more frequently, as you add more channels, right? You now have more processes that need to run to sync all that data to keep everything aligned. You need to make sure that it's, done within certain events. And so, once I update the price, making sure that triggers kind of a sync to my relevant channels that's on. And so there's kind of a lot just revolving around keeping things in sync as you scale it, right? It's very easy to do a one-to-one connection, but just from the scaling, the second you want to scale that, then it becomes more complicated. And a good example of that, right, is if you connect to a distributor and as like a retailer or brand, you connect to some sort of source and they provide you data, and then you want to push that to a channel, and then all of a sudden now you want to push that to another channel, perhaps. Maybe you don't even expand your distributors. The idea that those channels have different data structures, right? They have different specifications that are required in certain fields, different workflows for each of those channels. And so you end up adding layers, right? You end up adding like a layer at the channel level to say, how do I modify the eBay data versus the Amazon data, right? Or the Shopify data versus the Amazon data. And so you build these layers out as you go, and it slowly kind of evolves and it turns into basically a platform, right? And so if you really want to do things correctly and you want to give yourself the granularity of control, the build versus buy, you end up kind of doing that. From the infrastructure, you have to build out like a whole team most of the time, or at least someone that is very competent in kind of cloud engineering and how to set up dashboards and alerts when things are not working the way you want to, and having a team available to kind of respond to those and investigate those events. And so that's really one of the biggest differentiators kind of that put, platforms like us really a better choice in most situations, is just because we do that, right? So we take off that burden. And when it comes down to, this isn't even a technological concept. This is just like focus on what your business is good at, right? If you want to advocate your business as being a great, like perfectly on time and sync, and that's how you're just differentiating yourself against competitors, then yeah, maybe it makes sense to kind of, go down that route, or at least find a really core partner that has those functionalities. But most of the time it's a waste of bandwidth. It causes slow growth because you can't focus on initiatives that really would drive your revenue or drive your brand or your marketing strategies, or product selection, or distributor fulfillment expansion, whatever it may be, right? And so it's one of those things that when you look at the technology that goes behind keeping everything in sync and being able to constantly check on it, apply changes as necessary, monitor for issues, having thresholds in place to alert you of anomalies, things like that. It's a whole business in itself, and it's basically one of the reasons why we build a platform ourselves, because we saw all these challenges, and it's a little unrealistic to think that at least the majority of people out there have the capability of kind of achieving the same thing on their own. And so, it really is just like a separate focus and a separate business, and it doesn't make a lot of sense for people to kind of home grow that, inside of their business.
Yeah. And I think you guys gave some awesome insight, really on not even just custom integrations or e-commerce integrations, but custom dev work in general. And I think when it comes to deciding on a partner, to work with, do they have an API, right? Do they have some way for you to connect into that platform, by yourself with your in-house dev team? Obviously evaluating, do they have the back end team to build out certain custom integrations, right? Like our FlexPoint developers, are we able to do custom integrations for people? And it's really kind of evaluating who understands the work, like we've talked about, right? Like who understands formatting of data, who understands how to submit over orders. I mean, everything we've kind of chatted on there. And lastly, I would say before we move on and wrap up here, the whole pre-built versus custom integration too. Try out the pre-built integration. It doesn't hurt to, connect in one of those connectors and give it a try. See if it works for you. There's no need to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars for a custom integration when that pre-built integration could have worked just fine for you, and you checked all those boxes of need to haves. So obviously that's definitely a big thing to kind of keep in mind.
Yeah. And if I can add to that real quick, Travis mentioned this earlier about extensibility. And even, when we talk about pre-built, there's this notion that the integration works one way and that's it. And that's, you have to kind of go to that way. You have to sacrifice maybe your rules and the way you do things to kind of go with the flow of how that integration was built. And for a lot of platforms, that's true, right? But the extensibility is important because platforms like NetSuites, right? Like FlexPoint, often try to say we have a standard integration, we have a pre-built integration, but along the way, we know that things can be customized, right? We know that you may want to sync to certain locations. We know that, if you may want to apply dynamic rules that say, if you're from this category, you have these different rules and things like that, and sync these to these different fields in that scenario. Maybe these brands all have sale prices attached to them and you need to kind of control that logic. And so when you're building, when you're looking at the pre-built solutions out there, look to see if there are those dynamic rules with it, right? Look to see if you can customize your workflows even out of the box with a pre-built integration. Just because you have some unique workflows doesn't necessarily mean you need to go down the custom route. It may mean that you can leverage pre-built integrations as long as they're a little bit extensible and customizable, kind of with what we do with our FlexPoint integrations.
Yeah, it's like the the Zapiers of the world, Sligo. I mean, we've been referenced being an e-commerce Zapier, being able to set up all these different rules where man, Zapier is super cool. I don't know how to write a lick of code, but I can go into Zapier and just make all these cool little workflows, and I just feel like I was a developer. So that's it's a really good point that you bring up there. And lastly, I wanted to talk about this because we get this conversation all the time. And I really think that this question is really going to be valuable to a lot of retailers out there that are viewing and listening on this podcast. And that's the cost of custom integration. Like, how much does it cost to do custom integration, right? Obviously, we've talked about the evaluation process. We've talked about, third-party partners. We've talked about in-house versus outsource. The cost of a custom integration, I really wanted to chat on this because from my perspective, custom integration, custom website design, anything that's some type of custom work, I've seen so many retailers out there just get screwed. I mean, they pay hundreds of thousands of dollars for some custom website that really they could have just bought a Shopify store and put on a free theme or $50 theme, and it would have looked and performed just as great as that $10,000 thing that they bought. So from a pricing perspective, Matt, what's some insight that you have on there when it comes to evaluating the price of a custom integration? Like if you're like, for instance, someone says, "Hey, I need you to build this integration for me. I know this is what I have. I've evaluated it. How much is it going to cost me?"
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, and obviously it varies significantly depending on the ask and the company you're getting quoted from and their kind of experience. And you can kind of tier it out though, right? Like if you go to someone that is kind of a freelancer, right? They're going to have kind of a standard development cost, and what they don't have on is the expertise of, maybe your domain that you're working in, right? Maybe they do, but you're going to pay some sort of cost for that. And then if you go to say a company or a platform that has, a strong background and expertise in what you're specifically trying to accomplish, you're going to get some extra kind of a cost essentially there for subject expertise. But that's also going to result in usually less hours because like we talked about before, they don't have to get that ramp up and that background kind of on understanding, the specific domain that you're in. So really, I mean, what you're paying for, right, is a developer most of the time to just build that. The second piece of that is servicing or maintaining that integration. There may be some costs associated with that as well, so that you can make sure it's running reliably, because you're now, I mean, it depends on where you go, but you could think about it somewhat as, if it's a custom integration, it may be outside of the scope of standard servicing methodologies of, a pre-built connector, right? So for example, you go to a platform and they have a pre-built connection. If that connection has changes, that's one effort now to apply to many different people, right? So you can replicate that change very easily. Whereas if you have a custom integration, it's now your integration, and you have to have specific resources dedicated to go and modify and service that. And so you're going to eat more costs just because you essentially don't get to have crowdfunding kind of effect of, like leveraging that for multiple people. When it comes down to actually quoting costs, really, what we look at on our side is we look at the complexity and equate that to some sort of estimated hours. And usually we just do kind of a flat rate type of deal. But, we essentially have a pretty good understanding of what it would take based on an evaluation. And then we can kind of quote out a number of hours for different components. And so, one thing that you want to look at with the cost is really making sure that you identify where those costs are being allocated to. And so, if you have 3 or 4 different requirements, and back to the very beginning, nice to haves versus need to haves, kind of equate those hours based on what you need.
And one thing to kind of reiterate there too, what we've seen is just so people have an idea, is sometimes there's a charge for a proof of concept. A lot of times for custom integration, it's quoted out on like you were saying, an hourly rate. Based off of how many hours that dev team thinks that it's going to take to accomplish this. And then as well as sometimes there is like a maintaining cost. And Travis, what's some insight that you have on quoting out custom integrations?
Yeah, I mean, Matt brings up a good point that you're typically going to see 2 different approaches from the person you're hiring or the company you're hiring. It's time and materials, which is like, I'm going to charge you the hours that it takes me and the resources it takes me as I go. And then there's a fixed cost, right? That I'm going to scope this out and take more time up front to scope it out. I would be a little leery. I mean, in the larger companies and the larger projects, time and materials is almost required because scope creep can happen so quickly, and it's a multi-year project. You almost have to do it. But if you're just connecting 2 platforms and it's a 3 to 5 week integration, or 10 weeks at the most, or whatever it might be, I'd be leery of someone that can't scope it out fully and give you a fixed rate. As long as it's pretty straightforward, right? I think I personally have always said, if you're an expert in that area and you do the time up front to just scope it out and to clearly define a proposal, you should be able to get a fixed rate, and it kind of it works out for both sides. But with that said, if it's super custom, if you feel like you want to be more flexible and you're open to doing more of an hourly thing and you trust it, maybe I think it's good to think about an integration team that you're working with or contractor. The first one you might want to do like almost like a proof of concept and like a fixed rate, just kind of like date before you get married kind of thing, and get a feel for that. And then you might want more flexibility to be able to just change things or modify as you go. You might have a more complex project where you might feel more comfortable with hours and time and material approach. So just be thinking about that. There's usually 2. Fixed rate reduces the amount of risk on you. However, you might get a lot of pushback from your developer on like, that's out of scope. You might hear that a lot, right? So keep that in mind. And just to give everyone, because I'm sure anyone that listens to this is probably like, how much does it cost? Like, what should I expect? How am I getting ripped off, right? Just giving my 2 cents of what I see in the market, there's 3 different types of consultants you can hire. That, when I say consultant, there might be a mix of a team or just a single developer or whatever it might be. It's going to be the general, just freelancer, which for an integration work is going to be somewhere between $50 and $100 an hour. From what we've seen, right? If it's offshore in some other country, I mean, you could even get a little bit lower than 50, but typically if you're going to get a decent integration, it's done between $50 and $100 an hour. If you have a platform specialist, someone that knows the integration types and knows the platform you're working on, things like that, that's going to range between $100 and $300 an hour. Someone that, you're not just finding by putting out like an ad on Upwork, you're actually talking with someone that knows NetSuite or knows FlexPoint, or is like a preferred partner, a preferred Shopify Plus partner, right? You're going to see $100 to $300 an hour. That's typically what we see. And then that third level of, not only do they know Shopify Plus, but they're also specific to the healthcare industry, right? And they know your industry, they know your workflows, they know your platform, and they are super targeted and dialed in. You're going to see north of $300 an hour on top of that. And then, those kinds of guys have carved out a niche for themselves, and they are in a space and they've done it because they're good. and that's why they can charge that. And obviously, you know, for a lot of the small businesses, that's going to be, you can probably get by with the first or second tier. I would definitely almost always recommend the second tier for all the reasons we talked about earlier on the learning curve and the issues with just hiring a generalist when it comes to implementing. But so that's a long way of saying it can be anywhere between $50 and $500 an hour, you know, depending on who you're talking to.
Yeah. I like what you brought up though, like the different verticals, right? Like who is very specific to that product niche. And if they can solve that, it's just going to be much more expensive too. If they're, again, the platform and the niche preferred partner.
Yeah.
I definitely.
Sorry. I know we're at the end of it. The last part I just want to get in here is like, if it wasn't clear, the opportunity cost, if you hire a $50 a month or an hour developer and it takes them, you know, 10 weeks to do something and you have to go back and forth and all your time is invested in communicating it. And then you can hire someone for $300 an hour and they can do it in 2 weeks and they do it all themselves. They do it perfectly. You have to weigh that when you look at the two. And the best way of doing that is start with some kind of fixed, small engagement or proof of concept, whatever you can, and dip your toe in the water. So I just wanted to, that's a best practice for sure in hiring devs.
Well, and real quick too on that, I would say like a lot of people, like if you're ever evaluating a custom integration, right? Let's say you want the FlexPoint team to do it for you and NetSuite team to do it for you, whoever. If they go through the due diligence of fully evaluating proof of concept, asking you questions about like, do you need this, right? Like actually doing the consulting work, and then they give you a fixed price or some type of, you know, price off of their hourly rate. That's usually like, okay, this is a good company to consider. I've seen other companies, or I've heard of other companies that are like, right when you say just like out of the gate, like, hey, I'm going to need this. And instead of them going through that consulting evaluating process, they just say, yeah, that's $10,000 right here. It's like, I don't think it's very trustworthy of a company to consider that. Like, make sure to work with a company or a freelancer or a team that actually does the legwork up front to make sure it's fully scoped. I think is really my 2 cents on that part too. But, you know, wrapping up here, especially because we're going a little bit late on time. Matt, I'll start with you. Do you have any final thoughts, you know, kind of on this e-commerce integration, custom dev work, you know, that would be great for the viewers and listeners?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest takeaways for me is, you know, find pre-built connectors are generally a great solution, you know, and the biggest thing is that you have to determine if the nuances of your use cases fall outside of that. And if so, is the platform that you're maybe leveraging extensible enough to kind of handle those? And, you know, I think if you kind of look at it from that approach, most of the time custom development work really isn't needed. But at the same time, sometimes it's necessary to connect that last mile, you know, essentially to make sure that you get that last kind of bit of connectivity or integration that you need to fully kind of wrap up your entire solution and your business workflows. So, you know, definitely just be diligent around evaluating it. You know, get to know your partners that you're working with, whether that be a freelancer or a platform or a company that you're working with. Understand kind of what their workflow is, like how are they going about evaluating these? What are their quotes going to be structured like? You know, can they provide you some guidance? Like maybe you don't know if you need custom development work really, like can you present them your use cases and see if they can solve that within their platform before going down the custom route? You know, I know we do that a lot. And so just, you know, really the biggest thing you can do if you're looking at this and trying to decide if you need to get custom development work, really define what you need, what's nice to have, and work with your team or your freelancer, whoever you may be working with, to really ensure that those are kind of well defined and understand where does it fall outside of that connector, right? Like which of these are really the offenders, you know, and then make an educated decision. Like what's the, you know, back to what Travis was saying, what's the value of this? Is it going to bring enough value to my business to go down this route? What's the workaround if I don't go down this route? And how close can I get, you know, if I choose not to do custom development work? And then just make a decision, you know, based on all of that information. You have the ROI, kind of what it might return you and how it's going to impact your business. And so it gives you a good leg to stand on of like, did I make a good decision or not? You've done the proper, you know, work necessary.
Yeah. No, that's some great insight. And Travis, any final thoughts?
Yeah, just to piggyback on Matt said, pre-built is great because whoever has built that and is offering it will maintain it. The biggest takeaway custom dev work, custom integrations is you have to maintain it. And that is the, you know, 80% of the issues with building something custom is the maintenance of it. And so keep that in mind. What's the opportunity cost of maintaining something on your own versus having someone else maintain it? The second a product goes out of stock, but the integration's broken, you don't reflect that properly. Orders break down when you're sending them to your, supplier. Anything like that. An API is changing, and now you need to go rehire that guy to build another custom addition to the change in the API. So maintenance is the big key piece to. So if you can leverage pre-built and have someone else maintain it for you, do that for sure.
Yeah, that's a good point. How many times have we seen someone change their API or go from EDI to API, or go from an FTP to an API? And
even a CSV file and header changes, and you don't have the tools in place to understand its change. You just see that you just notice because you sold some out of stock, right?
Yeah. Sure. No, definitely. That's great. And you guys, great insight. Thanks for joining today. I appreciate it. Talking about e-commerce integrations is a huge topic, in the realm of e-commerce. But again, Travis, Matt, thanks again for joining. And obviously all the listeners and viewers, appreciate you jumping on the Modern Merchant podcast today. Definitely be on the tune for next episodes to come. See you guys.
Cool. Thanks for having us.
All right. Thanks.